Hey everybody, welcome to the Muckrake Podcast. I'm Yates, Sexton. I'm here with my friend, my co-host, Nick Hauselman. We are going to talk about the protest. And yes, we're going to talk about the video, all of that stuff. But before we do, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm hanging in there. Had a really nice weekend. We was, as we saw in the Discord, if you're part of the Patreon, I was out at the No Kings in LA. And it was good. And we'll have to talk a little bit about it because I'm kind of curious your take on some of the, I guess how they made it, how they made the vibe out there while we were there, and what that means in terms of how we're supposed to feel during these kind of protests.
Yeah, there's a lot to go over. And by the way, I mean, you buried the lead. You were wearing a nice little sun hat. You were protecting yourself in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I didn't know that was going to be of note.
It drove the people crazy. They loved your hat.
Okay, well, yeah. I mean, listen, it was hot as something out there.
Hot as fuck.
Yeah, and yeah, I needed to have shade,
I appreciated it. I thought you looked tremendous out there protesting fascism. And if you want to see pictures of things like Nick at videos, actual videos of Nick Hauselman at a protest, head over to patreon.com/Muckrake Podcast, support the show, gain access to the Weekender episodes on Fridays, as well as access to our Discord where the Muckrake community talks, shares, and marvels over Nick's headwear, because why wouldn't they?
I will accept the marvel.
There's marveling to be had. Well, speaking of the No Kings protest, Nick, on Saturday in the second round of No Kings protest, it appears from estimates that this was an even larger day of protest. Estimates have put it over 7 million Americans showed up, which, by the way, I will admit when I'm wrong. I had said when we were previewing this that I thought that maybe there would be less people showing up. It looks like more people did. Over 2,000 cities had this, from the biggest cities to the smallest towns. Of course, we're going to talk about this disgusting AI video that Trump shared. We'll get to that in a second. But I think it's important to talk about the No Kings protest, what it represents, what we can take from it. You were there. What are your thoughts on it? What were your reactions? Like, what did you walk away with, Nick?
Oh, well, the first thing was this was much bigger than the first one in downtown LA. And plus, there were dozens across the city. There's so many around that had tens of thousands of people as well. But this one had to have had six figures of people. And it was a march that was much longer than normal, where they led us through a number of blocks all the way around, and it circled back in front of the where we have all of our people run the city, called City Hall. Thank you. And so it was really kind of interesting. The thing I was going to bring up, though, was they had a truck with a band that was playing music, Guantanamera and all sorts of other stuff like that, which everyone was kind of enjoying and having a good time. And part of me felt like, I think we're supposed to be mad, and we're supposed to let people know how angry we are. That's why we're all here, even though there is that sense of community that we're trying to find. So what do you think about that? When these things do turn into some sort of like a party more than a protest.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I had watched that video of you walking by that truck with the band performing, and there's a lot going on there. One thing that has started to develop, we touched on it very, very briefly last week. We talked about the new proliferation of all these frog costumes and inflated animal costumes. You have bands that are playing, people are having a good time. I personally, I think that you do have to mix the anger with a little bit of joy in order to remind people that there's something worth fighting for, and also to build like sort of a collective experience. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, and again, I totally recognize this is my job. My job is to sort of give both sides of this, like how this is both positive and also how it troubles me. And it does, because I worry about it, as I said last week on the Weekender, I worry about this serving as catharsis. I worry about this being an opportunity in a really bad situation for people to get together with other people and let off some steam, as opposed to building something in opposition to it. I have concerns about that. I'm happy to get into this more in a second, but what was your feeling having experienced that.
Well, and that is fascinating because, right, if you let off steam, then it kind of dissipates into the future. We don't continue to have the focus that we need to get real change. I think that people were probably focused on the notion that we didn't want to have anything violent happen, because that just feeds into the narrative that we've been hearing all week long, which might be some sort of weird genius by the GOP to somehow convince us of that, even though I don't want to see any violence or any destruction of property necessarily. That said, we understand that generally when you want to make your point and we're truly angry about what's going on in the country and the way it's run, sometimes, damage to the, establishment of where the money counts is helpful, so either way, it definitely felt like we got done. And I remember, the GOP's, the New York Post, or whoever was trying to rip on the New York protest because everybody just sort of left when it was over all at the same time. Like clearly this must be, see how this is a fake protest and just people, but I'm like, I got to tell you, when the protest is over, people leave. And that is not a thing that's worth even reporting on. So I don't know. I just worry that, like what you're saying is that we didn't quite channel enough of the energy we needed to, even though the success of it could be also measured by how much the right has had to react to it, which I think is a really big part of it, and that they heard it and that they're aware of it, and whoever they wanted to say about it, as we'll get to in a second, the voices were heard.
Yeah, I think that's something, it is important to have a mass protest in order to change the paradigm. Like, you have to talk about it, even though places like the New York Times didn't really talk about it, right? Because they are, of course, messengers and, errand boys for, the wealth class. Like, they are not interested. They gave more coverage to the Tea Party, which tells you everything that you need to know. The Tea Party, like, in comparison to what happened here, like, had a very, very small footprint. And I think when it comes to this, Nick, I don't have the concerns about damage to property. I look at all of this, and this is a hard thing as an analyst who sees where this thing is going. Like, the idea of violence or sort of like an angry sort of reaction to it, it makes sense to have an angry reaction to this. Like, we are being abused, we are being oppressed, and it's getting worse. So I do have concerns. Like, looking at something like the inflatable animals, right? Is it good to show absurdity in the face of this stuff and to, sort of say, oh, we're Antifa, we're an international terrorist organization. Here's a frog that's going to dance in the street. I understand that messaging. And I think it's important that it is starting to spread. People are like, oh, this is going to become a symbol. But it also becomes a product to purchase. Do you know what I mean? And it's a product that you wear and it says, oh, you know what's going on here. You saw this online, so now you're going to do it. I get worried about the misdirection of energies. And I haven't seen anything from the people who organized the No Kings protest. I haven't seen anything in terms of an effort to point it somewhere. I haven't seen any effort to create an agenda, any effort to message around it, only to create the spectacle. If you come back from the future and you told me that these mass protests would eventually lead to a movement, I would be thrilled. I don't see it yet. That was my problem going into the protest this weekend, is I have not seen the momentum going in a direction. Yes, they are growing in terms of size, but I do not see the direction or the focus or the alternative that it could possibly have. That's what causes me concern, is that this is people going out on a Saturday, expressing their frustration, and then going back to their regular lives on Sunday.
Right. Yeah. At the very least, if we want to kind of get a measurement of how many MAGA are there and how many people are against MAGA out there, and are we really part of a movement, or is this like, is it really a tiny fraction of the country? Is it growing? I like that you brought up the Tea Party stuff, because that started as a movement where they were marching and they tried to have rallies. And yes, if you go back and look at the footage there, it's frightening.
Minuscule.
Really, really small, which also reminds me of so Ted Cruz was having some weird press conference on Saturday, I think it was, or Sunday or Friday. And this woman decided to stand up to him and interrupt him. And he said, listen, if you want to have your own rally, then you can go ahead and do that. Well, guess what? The next day she did. And when you see the panning of how many people showed up for her thing compared to like Ted Cruz and no one was there, it's really a big statement about where we are. The country is fed up. His approval ratings are low, are historically low. And it's hard to do even for someone like him. So, the question then starts to coalesce around like, this is supposed to show up in the voting. And that's going to be the next really, really big concern. And that might have to be the next, it won't have to be a no kings rally. It's going to have to be some sort of rally about how the free and fair elections.
Well, and that's what I'm saying is I think that the mind naturally jumps to, oh my God, we're in the majority, which is true. The vast majority of Americans, like 70 to 80%, have a broad consensus on what needs to happen in this country. But then you have the problem, Nick, which is neither the Republican or the Democratic Party represent the will of that mass majority. Both of them are fighting about other things, carrying out unpopular policies, and never actually speak to what people want. So where does it go from there? And part of me was also very pissed off to see a bunch of Democrats showing up at this stuff. Like, what are they doing, right? They're going out and saying we're, out in front of this stuff. There's no leadership. There's no direction. There's no sort of attempt to encapsulate this in some sort of an actual movement. So that does concern me. And it feels very much to me like we're living in a pseudo reality. Is what it is. Like, we go out, we do this, it shows that there's more of us than them, but then the next day it's like they just continue what they're doing. And yeah, people are fighting in the streets, but that's in the cities where the shit is going down. So like, can there be more? There has to be more than this. Well, and I'm waiting to see what that is and whether it's going to develop.
Well, we had a frank discussion in the middle of the protests about why we didn't have any of our politicians marching or speaking at these things. Now, am I to understand that you said you don't think that they should be?
Well, if they're going to be, it needs to represent something. Like, the Democratic Party is creating a faux resistance. They're saying that it's wrong and they're saying that they oppose it, but they're not actually opposing it. Yeah. Like they're creating the sort of symbolic resistance while not actually fighting for this thing. So when they start to show up, and real fast, Nick, the Tea Party, the Tea Party was successful. And by the way, it was synthetic. It was made, it was created and directed and funded by the wealth class.
Right.
It was successful because it forced the GOP to become more extreme with them. That's what happened there. And they had to face a choice, which is we either work with this developing movement or we risk being primaried. I don't see any of that happening here. And that happened very quick with the Tea Party because it was directed and because it had an end goal.
Right. And it's exactly why the right will accuse the left of sponsoring these things, and because it's what they did. That's how they operate. Yeah. I just don't understand how we don't have like Senator Padilla or Schiff or any of those people or any of our congressmen coming down and speaking and leading. It would be just a win-win for them politically. And I think you're right. There may be even more of a coordination across when you have something like this across the country to have everybody go and speak. And I don't give a crap if they're going to say, oh, it could be a security thing. And they could figure that out. But they would need, we had politicians marching with Martin Luther King in the streets during his marches, right? And that was a very powerful statement. And I don't see why they wouldn't want to try and tap into that, even just the look of that. We've seen it very little, but we need more of that. And if it's coordinated, great. But either way, someone should be the first to do that. Just like we saw, Padilla was the guy who got arrested for trying to get in the way of ICE agents, I believe it was a couple months ago. We need more of all of that. All these sort of dramatic moments standing up to the people on the right.
Well, you did have Democrats showing up. Schumer showed up to one. Fetterman showed up to one and got booed mercilessly. Mm-hmm. And I would imagine if you took a poll of the people who were there whenever Schumer or Fetterman were there, 80%, if not 90% or more of the people in the crowd would want them replaced. Mm-hmm. But it's the symbolic thing of getting in front of it and making it seem like this is somehow or another a movement that is Democratic Party based, when in fact, this is a populist anti-establishment movement, or it's supposed to be. And if it's not, I don't know what to say about that, because if it's not, and if it's not going to develop in this, my analysis says then that is actually taking energy that would need to go elsewhere and sort of letting it work itself out as opposed to metastasizing into something else.
Well, what about this? So, like during the George Floyd protests, we were coalescing around a very specific issue, police brutality, right? I don't know if that exists right now. I don't know if there was one singular moment, a singular issue that everyone was focused on. Now, for instance, I didn't think I saw one sign that talked about the government shutdown. I don't think I saw that. I don't know if that was even close to the top of the list here. But again, what are we doing? Why are we protesting at this point, right? There's so many things, and Trump has done this on purpose to flood the zone, that it's hard to kind of figure out how to coalesce and find that one thing that can inspire everybody to rally up and join in this movement.
Well, let me ask you some questions, because I think you just brought up a very important issue. Okay, so Democratic Party, right? Which is currently the quote unquote opposition party, quote unquote resistance party. What have you heard put forward by the Democratic Party to reform anything that's going on?
Nothing.
Have you heard, is it part of the National Democratic Party to, I don't know, even reform the Supreme Court?
No, not at all. Someone's mentioned maybe 13 justices, right? We've heard that.
13. Congratulations, everyone. But there's been literally nothing that has been proposed by the Democratic Party. There's the issue, which is if that was an actual resistance party, you would be floating like in other countries, you have like shadow secretaries, people who go out who don't have power who say this is what we would do. The Democratic Party's not doing that because they don't know who they are. They only know that they want the checks to keep clearing. They only know that they want to keep the groups quiet. They don't want to add to like the anti-establishment attitude in the country. When it comes to that, that means that the people have to start coming up with an agenda, right? That means that the people need to start demanding things. I haven't heard anything come out and like no kings. Sure, I don't want a king. You don't want a king. Other people don't want a king. We currently have, and we'll talk more about it in a second, a president who desires monarchical power. And that's how things are working. So what does that mean? What policy proposal is there? What reform proposal is there? I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard a single person put forward anything besides vocalizing an opposition to what's currently happening now. But what are they for? Nothing's been said. Do you feel like anything has been said?
No, not really. I mean, I know that we don't want ICE to continue doing what they're doing.
Sure.
But that's not necessarily a policy issue as much as, by the way, you can introduce plenty of policy to prevent this and abolish ICE.
By the way, you just brought up something very important. Have you heard the Democratic Party adopt the policy of abolishing ICE?
No, not at all. Crazy, right?
And by the way, going back to the George Floyd protest, what was the policy ask from the George Floyd protest?
Well, what they were trying to assign them was defund the police. Is that what you mean?
Move money from the police back into the community, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And how'd the Democratic Party do with that?
They fucking shit their pants because they thought that they would be accused of being weak on crime.
They got up from kneeling in their kente cloths and ran as far away as humanly possible. There's none of that here. Mm-hmm. Like even that reaction back then, and I will say, Nick, now that we're talking about it, the George Floyd protest, it wasn't just Floyd's murder and it wasn't just police brutality. It was the pandemic. It was growing inequality. It was this growing fascist threat that wasn't being taken care of. Even that was an organic movement. And it feels like now the anger and the frustration and the desire for change that like fueled the George Floyd protest has now been bottled up. Right? It's now in a really easily holdable container of, well, we'll just go out on this Saturday and we'll say what we need to do and then we'll go back home. That's the exact opposite of what actual sort of organic protests do.
If I were an authoritarian, I would encourage this. I would say, great, we're going to make it into a party and they're not going to be angry about it. They're going to feel like they're doing something and I can continue going about my business and not have to worry about it. Right?
I'm so glad you said that because that's where my mind keeps going is I know the Republicans are like painting this as an extremist thing. I know, and we're going to talk about that video in just a second. I know what they're saying about it, but each time this happens, wouldn't they be relieved that something else didn't happen? That there was just one Saturday that they got a little bit of bad press, and then a couple of days later, nobody talked about anything?
Yeah, yeah. Now, again, the Democrats are so worried about the BLM protests, and there's all the looting and whatever, and then they mix them with soft on crime. Well, I guess we've asked this question all the time, which is it a legitimate fear if you're a politician to be labeled as someone who is anti-police or not strong on crime? That's probably, we can agree you don't want to be labeled that way, right?
Yeah.
But guess what? They're going to label that no matter what you do,
regardless.
Yeah. So you might as well do something and not be afraid and wring your hands and not do anything about it, because they're going to accuse you of that anyway. And that's what they don't understand.
You know what suddenly just occurred to me, and I haven't thought about this in a very long time. When I was writing The Midnight Kingdom and I was like researching like the feudal era, there were all of these festivals, Nick. It's like your crops are done and like you go out and you get drunk and you eat a bunch of food, you listen to a bunch of music, you dance. During those festivals, it was customary to make fun of the king, to make fun of the lords and the nobles, and like you had people dress up as them. That's the the whole gesture idea. You had little plays where they got humiliated. Like it lets you blow off steam while you didn't have recourse. Right. That way you weren't going to go topple the king. You weren't going to go topple the noble or the baron. You got the experience of what it would be like, and you got it out of your system at these festivals. And I don't think this is intentional, right? I don't think that like somebody was like researching this, but it has the same energy to it. Right. You go out, you have, I assume you saw at your protest people who were dressed up as Trump, or they had like big ugly caricatures of him, or they had signs that made fun of him and all of this stuff. Like you go out and you get that sort of ceremonial humiliation of the power, but you're not actually stopping the power. It feels more like you're doing the pageantry of it.
Exactly. And that humiliation will come up a little later. We're talking about certain politicians too who seem to enjoy it.
They certainly do. And by the way, speaking of the reaction to this, we have to talk about the fact the president of the United States of America, Nick, shared an AI generated video of himself, Donald Trump, wearing a crown, flying a fighter jet that said King Donald Trump on the side, flying over the No Kings protest across the United States of America and dropping excrement on American citizens as they protested him. I want to talk about the reaction to it in just a second, but I think it's important that we talk about the effect of seeing this, how unbecoming this is. What was your initial reaction when you saw this? Because for me, this was disturbing on a level that I don't think that I was prepared for.
Oh, I mean, before the disturbing part hit me, I realized that, there is it reporting? Is it whatever you want to call it, that he shits his pants? He doesn't have a hard time keeping himself, continent. And so whoever decided to show him basically not able to hold his bowels while he's flying over people, like that's what I felt like. That's the connection I was making, which turned into it was a complete self-own that he wanted to post something like that, which I thought was ridiculous. So that was my initial feeling, and it took away any of the other horrific things that he's trying to apply out of all this, aside from the fact that he's just a fucking troll who is beneath the office of the presidency.
Yeah, I my mind didn't go there. He, from the very beginning, there has been a long tradition, Nick, and there have been exceptions where presidents have basically decried large portions of the population. It was Nixon did this shit. Even LBJ did it, like would basically criticize the Americans that they didn't see themselves as the leaders of. In some cases it's criminals or drug addicts or the poor or whatever it is. But there's always been this tradition of you become president of the United States of America and you at least pretend to be the leader of the entirety of the country. I think this was the evolution of hearing from him that he doesn't see Democrats as people. He sees them as, evil enemies. He doesn't wish any of them well. It's been the weird sort of chorus that's happened, especially since the death of Charlie Kirk. But watching him share that, Nick, we get glimpses into who Trump is and how he feels about us and how he feels about this country. And I think this, first of all, this AI generated slop is so disgusting and so stupid. And it's obvious what it is and where it's coming from and what it's doing. But seeing him express his disdain and hatred for people, I think it was a really jarring thing for me. Like, there's something very disturbing about seeing this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of plays into the whole thing, even like what he's done to the Oval Office, even just the way he's decorating it. It's just the notion of what he's done to the office itself and how anybody's supposed to, replace him or come after him and be in that and somehow regain what he's supposed to be is going to be difficult. But I do, we shouldn't overlook the hostility that he is portraying, because it is, short of, committing violence on people, dropping excrement on people from a plane like that it's a very hostile, thing that he's trying to say. And it's not satire. It's not funny. I don't see how it's funny. Not from, a president who, he seems like he'd be much happier doing a 2-drink minimum, stand up across these tiny little clubs across the country, which, it seems like he'd be more happy doing that.
And I don't want to lose the personal sort of thing about this, Nick. Like, I invite the people listening to this or watching this, think about what it was like to watch that video. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just like it's disgusting. Obviously, it's a disgusting thing. But watching it's October. I've been watching these horror movies and, sort of like ghost paranormal things. There's like this chord that gets struck in a human when you see something that is abhorrent. It's disturbing, right? And there's stuff that doesn't feel right. It doesn't look right. It doesn't fit within the parameters of the world as it's supposed to be. This thing coming from the President of the United States of America, first of all, the AI generated aspect of it is so disturbing and so upsetting, but having it be shared by the quote unquote leader of the free world, I want people to sit with that feeling. Do not become numb to this. Do not let this become normal. This is so beyond the pale and so telling about what it is that we're dealing with and the seriousness of the situation that we're in right now.
I agree. Well, let's hear what Mike Johnson said about it, because they asked him about this. And, a lot of times they'll cop out and just say, oh, I didn't see it. I don't know what you're talking about. Check on it later, yada, yada. But he actually did directly respond to it. So let's hear what he said.
Senator Johnson, you say that the Democrats had a Hate America rally, but what does it say that the President of the United States over the weekend released a video of him pooping on the American people?
The president uses social media to make a point. You can argue he's probably the most effective person who's ever used social media for that. He is using satire to make a point. He is not calling for the murder of his political opponents, and that's what these people are doing. I mean, they're in one of these photos. I think there's a picture of the president hanging in effigy by a noose on one of these.
We now equate people who are marching, regular citizens who have signs, to politicians who represent people and are leaders in the communities who clearly have not advocated for anybody being murdered and hadn't been for this whole time. But somehow that's evidence that the Democratic Party at writ large is some sort of, terrorist organization. But we have it's parody, right? That's what he thinks this is, satire. We've always known how bad the sense of humor is in the GOP. Basically, this one's breaking new ground.
Fuck these people. There comes a certain point in this where, I do this show with Daniel Moody on Wednesdays where, we sort of talk about the emotional impact, the psychological impact of living in this. And I can't listen to this shit anymore without feeling what I feel. Like, I can't just report on this. I can't just say, oh, here's the reason why I'll give you the context all day. I'll give you the analysis all day long. But the initial for that smug little fuck to stand there and do that and point at signs and completely pretend like any of this is okay, and like Trump sharing that video, like that isn't one of the most disturbing things that we've seen in years. Like, for these smug fucks to do this, it pisses me off and fills me with rage. Like millions of Americans came together over the weekend because they're frustrated about what's going on. We can talk about what it means and where it's going and all that stuff. For them to just look directly in the camera, and he doesn't even flinch. Do you know what I mean? Like, Nick, think about that. You as a person, me as a person, the people listening. To go out and have to say that without a visible reaction, can you even imagine? Can you even imagine standing at a lectern and having to be like, okay, how do we pivot away from the president sharing this disgusting video showing his contempt? How do we pivot away from that? How do we stay to our talking points? There's something wrong with these people. There's something definitively wrong with them.
Right. Well, I mean, there are people that will get off on humiliation. Now, that is reserved for like the privacy of your own home, and I have no problem. I mean, I totally get it. But we can't have our politicians in public, in front of press, humiliating themselves like this. Is all that is. And he did have a moment, like when they asked him about the Epstein files, and he keeps changing his story. If you pay attention to it, it's humiliating is the only word I can come up with. He does kind of glance and look at one point before he figures the answer. So you have some semblance of, oh, I realize this is going to be a worthless answer. But this one, he doesn't have any problem getting into and just sort of saying it's a satire and playing it off. He's been on the news a lot more, getting a lot more of these sound bites the last few weeks. Maybe by design, there must be something going on in their Republican, strategy sessions. But there's something going on where he is more than willing to do this and humiliate himself. And I don't know what's going on here, but I have to imagine that more and more people are seeing through this bullshit.
It's contempt and disdain. I mean, it's the exact same thing. And Nick, I saw it when I was in academia. I've seen it out in the world. It's the exact same thing when like a corporate spokesperson goes out and is like, Nestle is troubled by allegations of human trafficking and slave labor and making its, confectionery. We're going to look in like that soul destroying thing. The only way that happens is if they look at you and they think that you're not worth it. Like it's literal abuse and disdain and contempt. And I for one, this thing, Nick, I can't look at this without having an actual reaction anymore. Mm-hmm. Like, fuck these people and fuck that little smug fuck. I can't listen to it anymore.
Well, while we're talking about him, we really haven't talked a lot or in depth about the shutdown itself and the government. And since we're talking about Mike Johnson, I had this idea or this frightening thought. What if the GOP realizes that, hey, we don't have to open the government again? This is like kind of working. Things are doing the way we plan, and we can control everything we want to control. We can figure out how to shove some money over there to the traffic controllers and the FBI, whoever we know.
The military.
We can figure that out. I'm sure they can, right? And we can just kind of exist this way without ever having it. And then we'll never have to deal with the Democrats. And then we'll never have to deal with elections, basically, right? Because I have a sense that if you look deeply into the rules, if the government is not open, you probably can't have elections. Have you considered that?
Oh, no, they'll figure out another way to get around elections. But I think you're right in terms of the fact that they're in no rush to do this. SNAP benefits are getting ready to run out. Like, it would delight them to keep, social programs away from people. I don't think they're in any rush whatsoever. They haven't been having conversations. They haven't met with the Democrats. They haven't reached across the aisle in any way, shape, or form. Like, I think that's true. I think that we are seeing the eradication of the government structure in this country. And I don't think that means the Democrats should just, and it's a win-win for them. They keep it shut. They destroy all these things. The Democrats cave. They get what they want there, and they'll just do it again later. And I think that's right. I don't think that the normal rules apply anymore. I think that's the larger issue here. Is it's not the same quote unquote game that it always was. It's changed.
Right. And what they're proving was, there used to be this thing, we can't let the government shut down. It'll be catastrophe. The buildings will collapse. 20 days into this, the longest we've ever had, as far as I know, you can shrug and be like, things kind of are functioning the way they've always functioned. I know people aren't, there's a paycheck delay. But again, I just the quickest of quick Google searches indicates that you could still have elections because they're run by the local side of things, but there are a lot of things in terms of oversight that the federal government does apply to these to make sure that they're fair. So now you can start to realize where the government is shut down. Suddenly, these ballots are not necessarily have any oversight at all and could be manipulated. So it's really, really concerning, especially because we realize how helpful the government can be, not just to people who are in need, but to the economy itself, how many jobs it does create, right? And I think that's what Doge found out in a horrifically inefficient way, was that a lot of those jobs they try to get rid of were actually essential and made the government work and made the country work better.
Yeah. And again, I think my prediction when we talked about it was in November or December was when they were going to start kicking in their like anti-midterm election strategy in order to try and dismantle it. I think we're still on track for that. Yeah, I don't think they're in a hurry. I don't think that they want to bring the government back. Speaking of incompetence and grossness, Nick, we had talked last week very, very briefly about there in your state that on Saturday during the protests that the military was going to shoot live artillery over, I believe it's Interstate 5.
Yep.
Over Interstate 5, you and I talked about this in the battle between the government and Gavin Newsom of saying that he was going to shut down that interstate in order to protect people. Guess what, Nick? A shell shot by the United States military over Interstate 5. It exploded over the highway, and it actually it actually hurt a vehicle that was involved. I believe it was in Vance's group. God knows what would have happened if this stretch of highway wasn't closed down. We could have very well saw a lot of lives either ended or completely changed with people being maimed by this. I have my thoughts on this. This took place in your state. We saw this coming a mile away, and yet here we are.
They don't care, and even
they don't care.
From the right of this is even worse because, you know, a 2-inch piece of metal from 1,000 feet in the air coming down, and let's say you were driving 65, 70 miles an hour, that would do serious damage to your car, your windshield, all sorts of things. Or if you happen to be walking by and it didn't hit the freeway. Which is one of the main arteries in California itself, and the main way to get between like LA and San Diego, for instance. So it's what it is. It's like, and to bring Doge back again, like there were certain things that they were dealing with that you can simply not make a mistake with, like Ebola virus preparation or whatever. Like when they got rid of that, there's just no margin for error on anything like that. It can never be that way in the government with that kind of stuff. This is even more pressing in the kind of thing. There simply could never be any kind of mistake like they did here. And they're lucky that Newsom thought about this a little bit more carefully and realized we should shut this down out of abundance of caution. And, who knows what happened and how they saved the lives, but certainly it just shows how cavalier this government is with rules and safety.
I think that's exactly what it shows. There is no thought whatsoever about anything that they do and how it affects people's lives, at least not in a positive way, right? Everything is either about neutral, we're going to get rich off of this, who cares who it hurts, or we want to hurt people, right? Those are the two modes that they work in. And there's a word for that, Nick. It's sociopathy. Like there was no need to do this. There was that's the thing that really, really grinds my gears. I don't even know what other phrase to use. There was no reason to do this. It was just another sort of exercise of power and state might that didn't really show anything. It didn't impress anybody or whatever. They just wanted to make the big guns go boom. That's it. And it could have killed multiple people. I mean, it literally, and we talked a little bit earlier and it happened again. We don't even know how many innocent fisher people have been killed outside of Venezuela. We don't have a clue. They just really like making boats go boom. That's it. Yeah. And so in all of this, what we're dealing with, it's really hard to wrap your head around because the mind reels from this. This is not how people are supposed to behave. This is not how you're supposed to expect society to work. We have the most incompetent and least thoughtful people imaginable in charge. Mm-hmm. And the fact is, we keep missing mass tragedy by a hair. You know what I mean? Like whether it's what's going on with air traffic controllers and what's going on with our transportation system, or, you know, we don't miss tragedy all the time. There's one shooting after another. There's one piece of violence after another. People are being disappeared. Man, it's like walking through a rainstorm and not getting wet. You're going to get wet. You know what I mean? You might dodge something every now and then. There's going to be shit that happens because these people operate the way they do. There's no other way to put it.
And the worst part about it is I was trying to study the map about where Camp Pendleton is and where they were firing from. And because in theory, what they're trying to do is intimidate, have a big show, people. It was in a remote part, like as you're driving through between like, you know, LA and San Diego. So nobody really probably even saw this display. You know what I mean? There was no reason to do it. It wasn't any kind of, you know, whatever they intended it to be. And yet I was also a little bit surprised that perhaps somebody at that base wouldn't have refused to do this, right? That would have been a little bit of an interesting thing there too. If you found somebody in the military who's like, yeah, we're not going to, this is a waste. And when the potential for injury is high, we're not going to do it. But it tells you something that they can always find, I guess, someone on one of those bases to follow through and do no matter what the potential for injury is.
Well, and I think that's also part of this as well. It's like there's, you know, Nick, whether it's like organized crime or even a secret society, one of the ways that they sort of like develop themselves into their final form is they put a lot of people through a lot of things to see who they are and what they're willing to do. We're sort of in this winnowing out phase where the administration and the people involved are figuring out who will go along with whatever order. It doesn't matter how stupid it is. It doesn't matter how dangerous it is. It doesn't matter how destructive it is. Who is going to go ahead and do the thing that is being asked of them?
It doesn't matter how humiliated they're going to be by carrying these things out.
Exactly. And I think that's one of again, it's hard to wrap your head around it because this isn't the way anything's supposed to work. And you start to realize that like they are identifying the people who are willing to carry out some of the worst violence and abuse you could ever imagine. I mean, that's what's happening with ICE. And as a matter of fact, Nick, I've sort of talked about this a little bit and I didn't want to be right about it. It really does seem like the future unemployment plan of the United States of America is for the people who are going to be displaced in the labor force, whether it's an economic downturn or AI taking over jobs, is to put those people in ICE, to find the people who are willing to go out and brutalize other Americans or immigrants, weeding out the ones who would say no. Which is what's going on in our military, what's going on with the Department of Justice. People who aren't willing to go out and perp walk James Comey. People who aren't willing to fire a shell over, you know, Interstate 5. People who aren't willing to go into cities and actually harass and brutalize their fellow citizens. They're figuring out who is going to be part of the team when the next gear kicks in.
Yeah, I mean, and they're figuring that out too with, you know, blowing up boats in the Caribbean. And we just found out, as was completely predictable, that, you know, this was a Colombian ship with somebody who was a Colombian national who was a fisherman who survived. Eventually, someone was going to survive one of these things. And it turns out that this was nothing to do with drugs. And it just kind of continues to show what we had already thought was there's no evidence of any of this stuff. And, you know, the weird thing about Venezuela, when you dig into the reporting as well, is that they've targeted Venezuela not because they're not a major player on the drug trade thing. Not Colombia is actually, but not Venezuela. So you have to wonder, like, what is going on here? Why are they doing this other than to try and provoke them to respond so then they can have a coup, right? They want to attack Venezuela and replace it, the dictator there, Maduro. But at the cost of like some very innocent people just happen to be out on the water when they blow them up.
Again, you know, before we finish this up, Nick, it's the through thread basically of this episode. Who thinks in their mind it's okay to just randomly destroy, you know, a boat and kill, you know, people without knowing what's going on? Like they think that they're, you know, drug runners. That's what they think. That's how they, you know, sort of square the circle for themselves. But how do you order that? You know, you don't know. These are just people with families. Like, and they're just people who went out to fish, and the next thing you know, the might of the United States military is raining down on them. And what they're doing to Venezuelans, what they're doing to immigrants here in the United States of America, what we've done around the world, whether it was in Gaza or whether it was, basically every country in the world during the war on terror. It shows you what they're willing to do. And they're willing to do that to anybody. It really doesn't matter who it is. It just starts with those people who are more vulnerable, and it moves inwards.
And plus, it's illegal. It is illegal.
It's illegal.
No, there's no interpretation necessary, because anybody on a ship like that, to be able to be attacked like we're doing, has to be an imminent threat to the United States. And there is no imminent threat when they're that far away on a boat, unclear what they're going, where they're going. And a lot of people are trying to say, I'm no fisherman, I'm no expert on boats, but they're saying that a lot of these boats would never make it anywhere near the United States from that distance, having to go through open waters like that. So this is a real problem where, he was granted absolute immunity. Everyone is now, drafting behind him underneath this, because he will not be prosecuted, saying it was the official duties of the president, and then he'll just pardon anybody underneath that who is implicated. And so as a result, no one's even going to have oversight anymore. And that is the biggest problem. And that's what the Democrats, getting back to that, would need to be figuring out and pitching or creating policy around, is how to have a much more independent Department of Justice, much more independent, areas that have oversight over the government, over the executive branch.
And that's just the start. There's so much more to do, which is why I look at something like the protest and say, please come together for something. Mm-hmm. All right, Nick, that's going to do it for this episode of the Muckrake Podcast. We'll be back with the Weekender edition on Friday. A reminder, head over to patreon.com/Muckrake Podcast and regain access to that, the Discord community, live events, special shows. We need to do a live show here soon. And thank you to everybody who does support the show. This is a listener-supported show. We need your help more than ever. In the meantime, you can find us over on Blue Sky. Nick is at Nick Hauselman. I'm at JY Sexton. Be safe.